You might have known Satan, the fallen one, the deceiver, the adversary of all that is good. But before his name became a curse, it was a song. Before he prowled in shadow, he blazed in glory. His true name was Lucifer, which means light bringer. He was the most radiant of all God's creations, the firstborn of divine splendor, shaped before time began. His form shimmered with heavenly fire. His voice rolled like thunder wrapped in melody. The heavens did not just admire him, they stood still when he passed. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 to 13. He stood not in defiance then, but in worship, not as an enemy, but as heaven's crown prince. But the tragedy of Lucifer is not that he was born evil. It is that he was born so extraordinarily good, yet chose evil. For amid his beauty pride stirred. Admiring his light, he forgot its source. Enamored with his own reflection, he no longer reflected God. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 17. He no longer wished to serve, he wished to reign. And with a voice once used to sing praises, he spoke one word never heard before in heaven, no. And when he said it, all of creation paused, for the morning star had turned away from the morning. Before we continue, welcome to Sacred Wisdom, the channel where we don't just read the Bible, we step into it. Each story we tell is crafted to ignite your imagination, challenge your soul, and bring ancient truths to life like never before. If this is your first time here, thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe so you don't miss any of the stories that remind us. Faith is not just history, it's eternity unfolded. Now, having glimpsed the moment when heaven trembled at a single word, it's time to go back, before the fall, to a time when Lucifer was not yet the enemy, but the embodiment of divine beauty and heavenly command. Let us behold Lucifer in glory. Before the first star was lit, before the foundation of the earth was laid, the Creator formed his masterpiece, not the sun, not the oceans, not even man, but Lucifer. Fashioned from celestial fire, robed in glory, crowned in splendor, he was the first to bear the breath of divine intention. His name was written in light, his garments glistened with stones not found on earth, topaz, onyx, sapphire, emerald. Every movement shimmered with purpose. Every word rang with clarity. He was not a servant among many, he was the guardian cherub, the closest to the throne, the one entrusted with the sacred presence. As the prophet declared, "You were anointed as a guardian cherub, for so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones." Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 14. Lucifer was not merely beautiful, he was the measure by which all beauty was known. When the heavenly choirs rose in waves of praise, it was his voice that soared above them all, clearer, richer, more radiant than stars colliding in song. He did not command angels by decree, but by example, by the sheer gravity of his magnificence. Even Michael, the warrior of heaven, held him in deep regard. Among the seraphim he moved like a living flame, his wings a blur of reverence and might. His presence carried weight, not of burden, but of wonder. He was heaven's great cathedral made flesh, the first symphony of God's glory made visible. The other angels did not envy him, they exalted him. For his glory did not yet reflect pride, it reflected the source. Lucifer knew his power was not his own, but a gift, and he wore that truth like a crown. He led the celestial choirs in perfect rhythm, raising melodies that made the stars dance in harmony. With every note he echoed heaven's purity. From the day you were created, you were blameless in your ways. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 15. No shadow touched him, no flaw was found in him. He was not yet fallen, he was exalted. But even in the greatest works of heaven, freedom breathes, and with freedom the possibility, however distant, of turning. Lucifer's splendor was unmatched, his wisdom second only to God, his authority vast, his influence magnetic. He bore the title Morning Star because he was the first light before all others. Yet in the same light that inspired worship lay the potential to desire it. The line between reflection and ambition is thin, and even heaven was not exempt from the mystery of free will. In the stillness of heaven's perfect harmony, Lucifer stood as its crowning jewel. his radiance unmatched, his wisdom peerless, his presence magnetic. He was not merely loved, he was revered. The heavens rejoiced at his song, and the stars themselves pulsed to the rhythm of his voice. And yet, even the purest light, when turned inward, can cast a shadow. One day, as he gazed upon the fiery stones beneath the throne of God, a thought, soft as dust, brushed against his mind. What if this glory were not borrowed? What if it were mine? He had stood beside the throne. Why not upon it? He who led worship began to hunger for it. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 15. The wickedness was not sudden. It did not roar. It whispered. It told him he had earned this glory. It told him perfection deserved sovereignty. At first he resisted. Surely this was not holy. But as days in eternity passed, the thought returned, each time more convincing, more justified. He had been adorned in beauty. He had walked among the fiery stones. Why should he, the first of all created things, forever stand beneath? Beneath what? A God he had never surpassed, but no longer feared. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 17. It was not hatred that entered Lucifer. It was belief. Belief that he was more. Lucifer began to withdraw, not physically, but inwardly. Where once his joy came from magnifying God, now he magnified his own reflection. The light that danced around him no longer reminded him of his Maker. It became a mirror of self. He moved among the angels with the same grace, but no longer the same purpose. His songs grew sharper, less reverent, more exalted. He sang not to God, but like God. A quiet tension began to radiate from him. The seraphim sensed it, but said nothing. Even Michael, the watchful warrior, grew uneasy. Lucifer smiled as always, but something behind his eyes had cooled. Beneath that light now flickered a fire not kindled by heaven. Then, like lightning flashing behind a clear sky, the thought turned to conviction. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 13. He would not wait to be given glory. He would take it. He would climb higher than the others, higher than the throne itself. He believed the light within him was no longer a reflection, but a source, a wellspring of divinity unjustly contained. He was not content to be the morning star. He wanted to become the sun. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14. The words pulsed in his spirit, not as poetry, but as prophecy. From this point there was no turning back. In the vast corridors of heaven's silence, Lucifer made his choice. Not yet spoken aloud, not yet declared to others, but sealed in his heart like a covenant with pride. His beauty was now his right, his wisdom his weapon, his influence his army waiting in silence. And somewhere in the golden halls of eternity, the first crack echoed, a fracture not of stone, but of obedience. Rebellion had not yet begun in action, but in desire. And from desire would come destruction. There comes a moment in every rebellion when silence is no longer enough. Thought becomes word, desire becomes declaration. In Lucifer the storm had grown quietly, but now the fire would speak. He had waited, watched, measured the light of those around him. He knew which angels gazed at him with awe. He knew those whose loyalty wavered not from wickedness, but from wonder. Wonder that perhaps their beloved morning star was destined for more. So Lucifer chose his moments, not with rage or roar, but with whispered brilliance. He approached not with swords, but with questions. Why must we always bow? If we were created in perfection, why remain beneath? He spoke not lies, but half-truths, poison wrapped in light. He never shouted. He reasoned. God gave us free will, he said, and with it the power to choose. What if obedience is not the highest form of love? His words rang with logic, not rebellion. He spoke of dignity, of destiny, of being more. The angels who listened did not know they had begun to fall. They saw no horned tyrant, no twisted monster. They saw Lucifer, the one who had led them in worship, who had carried divine melodies in his wing, and so they listened. And some agreed, For who could argue with the most glorious being heaven had ever seen? His charisma was overwhelming, his vision majestic. And so the division began, not in war, but in wonder. But not all were silent. Amid the gathering whispers, one voice rose like thunder cutting through mist. Michael, the archangel, the warrior, the guardian of heaven's order, stepped forward. Small in rank compared to Lucifer, but mighty in loyalty, he spoke not from logic, but from truth. And with a voice that echoed across the firmament, he cried out, "Who is like God?" Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, the words struck like lightning, exposing the lie beneath Lucifer's brilliance. For in that one question lay the flaw in every rebellion. No glory, not even Lucifer's, could compare to the glory that created him. No created thing could ever become the creator. Lucifer turned, he did not tremble. His eyes blazed, not with shame but with wrath. "You do not understand," he said coldly. "We were made with greatness, yet we kneel to dust." He spoke of the Creator's plan to take human form. "Why must we bow to flesh," he demanded, "to creatures made of clay?" The bitterness was unveiled now. He was not merely rising against God's rule. He was rejecting God's love. The incarnation was his breaking point, that God himself would become man and ask the angels to worship him in that form. Lucifer would not endure it. He would not bow, he would not serve, and for the first time in eternity, rebellion had a voice, a face, a name. With icy resolve, Lucifer stood before the host of heaven and declared what had burned in his heart for ages. "I will no longer serve." His wings, once vessels of praise, now spread wide like a darkened eclipse. "We are the light," he said, "not the shadow. We deserve not submission but sovereignty." And as he spoke, countless angels gathered behind him, not out of hatred but out of belief. They believed in him. Thus, war did not begin with a sword. It began with a choice, with the morning star raising his voice against the light that made him. And heaven, once the realm of eternal peace, now shuddered. For rebellion had begun. Heaven, once echoing with harmonies of praise, now trembled under the clash of light against light. No longer whispers, now war cries. No longer hidden thoughts, now open swords. Lucifer, the morning star, had become the commander of 1/3 of heaven's host, his charisma sharpened into command, his pride wielded like a flaming blade. His angels, once singers of glory, now flew like comets of defiance, wings stretched in revolt, yet standing before them was Michael, not clothed in splendor but in faith. He raised no arguments, offered no compromise. His sword gleamed with conviction and his cry rang through the fractured skies. "Who is like God?" Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. It was not just a name, it was a banner, and beneath that banner, the faithful stood, unyielding, unshaken. Then the skies split. What was once a realm of light became a storm of fire and fury. Wings collided like thunderclaps. Blades of divine flame screamed through the heavens. The loyal and the fallen clashed, not as mortals do, but as eternal beings locked in a war beyond time. The firmament blazed with every strike. Stars dimmed in sorrow. It was not hatred that fueled Michael's army. It was love. Love for order. Love for truth. Love for the one who gave them light. Lucifer, burning with rage, hurled himself toward the throne, shouting, "I will be like the Most High." Isaiah chapter 14, verse 14. But no matter how fiercely he burned, his fire could not consume the eternal flame of holiness. Michael met him in the center of heaven's battlefield, and heaven itself held its breath. With one final cry, Michael raised his sword and uttered the sentence that would echo through eternity, "By God's power, fall." In that instant, Lucifer's glory cracked, his light broke. What had once been beauty became ruin. The morning star fell, his wings scorched, his crown shattered, his name no longer sung but feared. Along with him, the angels who followed his rebellion were cast down like lightning, plummeting through the dimensions of glory into the abyss of separation. He was not strong enough and they lost their place in heaven. Revelation chapter 12, verse 8. The first war had ended. Heaven still stood, but it would never again be untouched by the memory of pride. The morning star fell like a flame torn from heaven's tapestry. Once the most radiant among all created beings, he was now hurled downward, out out of light, out of presence, out of peace. His wings, once draped in music and praise, became twisted by gravity and grief. What had lifted him toward the throne now dragged him into the abyss, and with him fell those who believed in his false glory, a third of heaven's host, torn from their places like stars ripped from the sky. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn! You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. There was no ceremony in their descent, only silence, only separation. Heaven did not celebrate, it mourned. For beauty had become bitterness, and song had become silence. They did not land in flames. They became flame-burning with the torment of loss, the unbearable weight of having known God and choosing to stand apart. They were not thrown into hell, not yet. Their exile was spiritual first, a tearing away from everything holy, like lungs that once breathed only light, suddenly gasping in a void of smoke. Lucifer became Satan, not by a new name, but by a new nature, the accuser, the enemy, the wounded prince who now roared in hatred against all that remained pure. He had lost the throne, but not his will. If he could not rise above the stars of God, he would pull them from the heavens one by one. His vengeance would not strike heaven again, it would strike the earth, the fragile world God so dearly loved. And so in that abyss where glory once was, a new vow was born, not of light, but of war. Satan fixed his gaze upon creation. He had heard of it before, the dust-made beings, shaped in God's image, formed for love, not for power. He would not just oppose them, he would twist them. He would make them fall, just as he had. If I cannot have heaven, he hissed, then neither shall they. This was not madness, this was strategy, to desecrate what God called good, to tempt, to accuse, to divide. His kingdom would be built on echoes of his fall, and thus the exile of Lucifer birthed not only Satan, but every shadow the world would ever know. Heaven still stood, its foundations unshaken, its throne eternal. Yet even in its glory there remained a scar, a memory etched into its light like smoke on alabaster. The war had ended, the rebellion silenced. But what had once been pure was now marked with history. Lucifer's name was no longer sung, it was whispered, not as praise, but as warning. A star had fallen, not because God failed to hold him, but because God in his love allowed freedom to exist, even if it meant the price of betrayal. For what is love if not freely given? God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. 1 John chapter 4, verse 16. Lucifer had chosen himself. He had chosen isolation, and in doing so had become the origin of every shadow, every sorrow that would later haunt the earth. But his fall did not end in silence. It echoed across the ages. In Eden, his whisper twisted the innocence of man. In deserts, he tempted even the Son of God. In every heart that longs to be its own God, his voice still lingers. He no longer bears light, but offers false fire, bright at first, cold in the end. His beauty is gone, but his ambition remains. And yet, despite all he destroyed, one truth has never changed. God reigns, and no throne, no rebellion, no lie has ever unseated him. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John chapter 1, verse 5. Satan's kingdom is built on illusion, but truth, like God, cannot be overthrown. So now, dear listener, we must ask, what do we make of this fallen star? A monster? Yes. But once, an angel. Once, the greatest of us all. That is why his story wounds, because it reminds us that even the brightest light can fall, and that pride does not need horns to destroy, it only needs a mirror. Let Lucifer's story not end with horror, but with warning. For every time we seek to exalt ourselves over truth, over love, over God, we echo his fall. His name was once Lightbringer. Let us be sure that the light we bear never turns against its source. Heavenly Father, you are the source of all light, all truth, and all glory. Guard our hearts from pride, that we may never forget you are the giver of every good and perfect gift. Let us walk in humility, reflecting your light, never claiming it as our own. Teach us to bow before you in joy, to trust in your wisdom, and to follow your will, even when the world tempts us otherwise. Keep us from the path of rebellion and lead us always into your everlasting presence. In the name of your Son, the true morning star, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.